What is going on, guys? Happy Sunday. We're here for our Week 15 NFL live stream. We're going to cover any last-second injury news, my player pool, of course, and any live questions that you guys have down in the chat. Let's go ahead and start off with some of the injury report. I'm going to bring it up here on my phone. The main talking point for at least the 1 o'clock set of games is going to be James Conner. James Conner is coming in questionable. We do have Chase Edmonds, who's back from IR. And if he ends up missing this game, Chase Edmonds becomes one of the best value plays on the entire slate. So we should be getting that news any second now in the next 10, 15 minutes. So if any of you guys see that on Twitter, I want to go ahead and throw that down in the chat when it comes in. I would be greatly appreciative. Same thing with Zach Ertz. We already have DeAndre Hopkins out of that offense. If they're going to be without Zach Ertz as well, who is questionable as of right now, that would open up a ton of usage for players like Christian Kirk, AJ Green, Rondale Moore, essentially everyone else who's active on that offense. In terms of other injuries we already know about, we have Emmanuel Sanders, who is going to be doubtful for today's game. That's going to open up some extra opportunity for Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs, obviously, but maybe a little bit more sneaky also for a Dawson Knox. So we'll definitely hop into that when we get into the positions here. On the screen, I'm going to bring up my quarterback projections. As we are finishing up these injuries, we have David Johnson expected to play. Rex Burkhead, who was upgraded from doubtful to questionable. We're going to have to keep an eye on that, believe it or not. Even though that Houston, Texas team is definitely one of the worst squads in the NFL, they don't have many healthy bodies on offense. And if Burkhead ends up being rolled out, David Johnson could be in line for a good amount of touches. In terms of some of the other injuries we know about, these are more of the COVID concerns. We have Jalen Waddle out due to COVID. Is going to lead to increased usage for Myles Gaskin, Miles Gesicki, Devontae Parker, even an Albert Wilson or a Mac Hollins. The issue is that offense is crazy chalk, which we'll hop into here in a second as well. We also have Kadarius Toney, who's already been marked out, is going to give some extra usage to Sterling Shepard, who is returning from injury, but he was putting up some massive numbers at the beginning of the year. So I am excited to go ahead and play him. With the injury news for 1 o'clock out of the way, there is some other stuff at 4 o'clock that we have to worry about. But that news is so far out that we're not really going to be reacting to it right now. And that being said, for our quarterbacks, there's definitely about 4 or 5 that I like a lot more than a bunch. These 5 I have down as yeses are going to be my core plays by far. At the top of things, really like Kyler Murray in this matchup against the Lions. Not only do they rank as one of the worst defenses, both against the pass and the run, you're dealing with heavy favorites at home. Exactly what you're looking for when you're trying to target a top-end stack. At $7,900, he's definitely a little bit more expensive than we'd like, but there is a ton of value on this slate. With so many people out due to COVID, it's week 15 of the NFL season. There's already going to be a ton of injuries to begin with. We don't have to worry about salary as much this week. Dak Prescott is one of my favorite plays on the slate as well. He is coming in with some of the highest ownership at the position, but this matchup against the Giants is tailor-made for him to go out there, not only put up a relatively good floor, but also a ceiling performance potentially. This is a divisional game. Even though the Giants aren't in the running for the division or anything like that, they could very well play spoiler at this time of the year. Teams, they're motivated either by making the playoffs or by playing spoiler. If this ends up being a closer game, Dak Prescott could hit his ceiling. In cash games, I absolutely love him. He has one of the highest floors on the slate. Joe Burrow is a little bit of a lower owned option. I'll definitely be getting to. I have the Bengals as favorites over the Broncos in this game. I do not agree with the line whatsoever. So as a result, Joe Burrow is coming in higher projected on my board than he is in most other projection systems. Ben Roethlisberger, he's absolutely going to have to deal this week. And the main cause for a little bit of encouragement here are the Vegas lines. He has a 280-yard passing over-under. This Titans team on the defensive side of things, particularly in the secondary, is one of the weakest units in the NFL. So that really shouldn't be a surprise. Their playoff hopes are on the line. If they want any chance of making the wild card, they're going to have to go out and win this game. So if they get behind early, don't look for Ben Roethlisberger to get pulled. Look for him to go out there and absolutely try to bring the team back into it. Even if he's unsuccessful, that garbage time usage can be more than enough to pay off. Cam Newton is the last guy I have my eyes on. I like his rushing upside. He's definitely had some down games of late. Has not looked like he did when he first came out. But the issue is he's going to turn that around eventually. He has shown some semblance of hope with his passing. He's had a very strong arm. He hasn't really been in tune with his wide receivers. He's hitting them a little bit off of beat. They're not in a rhythm or anything like that. But once they get that figured out, once he's able to time up his routes with his wide receivers, I look for him to have significant improvement. he's been very good on the ground. And because he hasn't been quite as effective with the passing as I think he will be at some point this year, they've been hunkering down on that running ability, right? So they're setting the edge. They're applying a QB spy to him in almost every single play. But once he starts to dissect them a little bit with the passing, they're not going to be able to do that. They won't be able to afford to allocate an extra defender to just watch his rushing ability. And that's when you're really going to see him put up numbers. So I think this Buffalo defense is no doubt one of the best units in the NFL. But matchups really can't scare me too much. Remember when Jonathan Taylor was playing Buffalo? He put up over 56 fantasy points. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Cam Newton here, but there's not a matchup in the NFL that I'm scared to play against. That is definitely has an impact on a player's median projection, but in terms of hitting ceiling, has little to no impact at the end of the day. If you're playing cash, right, you want to make sure you're targeting guys with high median projections. But this is a GBP purely play. But going with somebody like a Cam Newton, not only is he relatively cheap, he gives you that rushing upside. In terms of guys I won't be playing, because I obviously want to cover some of my fades here as well. Jimmy Garoppolo, I expect the 49ers to have a little bit of a rush-heavy attack. They've been a little bit pass-heavy these last 2 or 3 weeks. I expect them to get back to their identity with a Jeff Wilson Jr., with a Trey Sermon, whoever they use back there in the backfield. JaMychal Hasty is going to have a lot of production today against a very weak Falcons team. Tua Tagovailoa is the chalk of the slate. I have him at 12.7% ownership, but I would not be surprised if he came in closer to 18 or even 20%. He's essentially the tout play of the week. Everyone out there, every website out there is telling you to go out and play Tua. And I get it, right? The Jets are a bad team, but they're not a bad secondary. They're not a bad against passing quarterbacks. We've been over this before. It's happened multiple times this year. Everyone was targeting them. Ryan Tannehill against the Jets earlier this year. Ryan Tannehill was like 22% owned in weeks 4 or 5. I don't remember the exact week. He went out there and they lost to the Jets. Derrick Henry was the only semblance of an offense they had that week. It managed to fumble the bag there. Tua's a worse quarterback than Ryan Tannehill. I have a very similar feel to this game as I did earlier in the year. The Jets, even for as bad as they are as a franchise, they're very turnover prone. They lit up a ton of rushing yardage. That secondary is a lot better than people want to give credit for. So I'm going to be fading Tua this week. He's not somebody that I'm really running to the window to play any week, let alone when he's chalk in a relatively low over-under game for an offense that has not been very effective passing this year. There are just a ton of red flags surrounding Tua in this circumstance, and I get it, right? It's the Jets, but we have to put that bias aside and actually take a look at what the matchup looks like on paper. And on paper, it's a negative matchup in a low-scoring game. I want no exposure to it, Tua. Let's go through a couple of the other fades. Tyler Huntley, I don't think I should surprise anyone. He looked horrible against the Browns. Now, granted, he was coming in with no practice, no exposure with some of those wide receiver number ones, so he could very well improve this week. The fortunate part for him is he's playing the Packers. The Packers have one of the best defenses in the NFL, if not the best defense, and that's going to bode for a lot of trouble for him. Davis Mills, he's looked good these last few weeks, but I'm not going to be scoreboard watching. Right? If you take a look at his first 5 or 6 weeks of the year, it was absolutely atrocious. And while I think it's a great story that he started to really turn it around, maybe he gets the starting job next year as a result. For fantasy purposes, I don't have enough confidence behind him. These guys at the pure bottom of the board, you could use them as flyer plays. They're not going to be in my player pool. If I was going to look for a flyer play, I'd rather spend up a dollar or two more, $1,000 or more. Sorry, $100 or more, something like that, for a Matt Ryan or a Zach Wilson. First off, Zach Wilson is going to be playing from behind against Miami. He's had some good games of late. There's no Elijah Moore there, so no one wants to go out and play the Jets. Coming with 3.1% ownership. If I was going to go to anybody in that Miami game, I'd rather go to Zach Wilson. Not only does he bring some rushing upside to the table, we know they're going to be playing from behind. We know they're going to have to be passing the ball. There's a very good chance that the Dolphins, even if they end up winning this game handily, do it by rushing. Right? If they get up by a touchdown or two, they're going to rely on Myles Gaskin, Malcolm Brown, Solomon Ahmed, who they have 3 very solid backs over there in Miami. They don't necessarily have to pass it. On the other hand, the Jets, if they're going to win this game, it's going to be because they're passing the ball like crazy. And if they're losing, they're going to be passing the ball as well. So I like going there if you're taking a pure flyer play. Matt Ryan, same type of thing. High over-under game against this 49ers team. And even though the 49ers have been very stout over the last week or so, at the beginning of the year, they were letting up a ton of passing yardage. If there's any chance Matt Ryan and the Falcons keep this a game, it's because he has some success through the air. Let's move on to running back, where it gets a little bit more interesting, particularly with the injury side of the equation. Let me bring it up here. All right, here we go. So at running back, we have a lot of chalk. We also have a lot of low-owned options. I think it could be good as well. So just like at quarterback, where I'm fading the chalk in terms of Tua, we're going to be doing that at running back as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the chalk. First and foremost, it's James Robinson. And everyone loves themselves a good narrative. That's very apparent there with the 34.5% projected ownership number. But James Robinson has been atrocious this year. I mean, last week, 6 carries for 4 yards. Carlos Hyde had more usage the week before that than him. He had 86 yards 3 weeks ago. But again, that's one of the best games he's had the entire year. So for him to be 33, 34, 35% owned, anywhere in that range is just absolutely ridiculous. Really, the main thing driving his ownership up is that the new interim coach has said, yeah, James Robinson's my guy. We're going to give him the ball more. A lot of that's because Trevor Lawrence literally called for it, right? You guys remember in the media a few weeks ago, he said, yeah, we really need to get James Robinson in the game. I don't know why Carlos Hyde was in there, blah, 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 blah. What happened? He got 6 carries for 4 yards. So just because Urban Meyer's out of this offense, do we really think all that much is going to change? Second of all, this Houston Texans front seven, one of the most underrated units in the NFL. This is a low over-under game. I expect both sides to struggle here. I expect there to be less than 40 points scored in this game. So I don't want any of Trevor Lawrence. I don't want any of anybody like a James Robinson either, especially at over 30% ownership. People are expecting the whole world to change just because Urban Meyer isn't there. And while he might be a horrible coach, horrible person, all the things you want to say about it, changing the coach isn't going to change how this team's playing overnight. It just doesn't happen. Look what happened with the Raiders and John Gruden. Absolutely fell apart after they lost their head coach. And I don't think anyone's doubting Urban Meyer's X's and O's. I mean, the guy knows football better than just about anyone else. That was very apparent when he was a commentator, had some of the most insightful stuff out there. Just a horrible guy, right? And you can't follow somebody that's a horrible leader, and that's very apparent. Maybe in the college football, you can get away with something like that, but you're not going to do that in the pros. Either way, I don't think that change is going to make all that much of a difference, right? The guy knows his X's and O's. Maybe he was utilizing James Robinson a little bit less than he should have. But even if we give James Robinson, 22 touches in this game, sure, he's $5,400. The matchup isn't great. Houston Texans defense is a lot better than people want to give him credit for. The reason why they let up a lot of fantasy production to opposing running backs is game scripts. They lose a lot of games. They're playing from behind a lot. And when you're playing from ahead as an opposing team, what are you going to do? Going to run the ball a lot more than usual. So that's why you see a lot of the numbers you do for the Houston Texans. You look at it on a per snap basis, you can see in a completely different story. Let's talk about some of the guys up top, though. Because I'm spending a little bit more down at wide receiver than I am at running back, I'm going to be able to spend up for some of these top tier options. First and foremost, Joe Mixon is my favorite play of the week. Really like him here against this Denver Broncos team. Not only do I expect the Bengals to win this game, the Broncos are favorites here by 3 points. I expect it to go the other way. I expect a lot of the fantasy options for this Bengals team to have a good week as well. They have one of the best secondaries in the NFL. They're extremely young. Surtain is going to be a top cornerback in the NFL here in a year or two, if not number one in that top 3 at the very least. I think he's top 5 already. I mean, that's how good that rookie is. Joe Mixon's not going to have to worry about that. They have a relatively weak front seven. Ever since they shipped off Von Miller, they cannot stop the run. They're just bleeding up front. Very porous there. So Joe Mixon, even though he's a little bit hampered, he's dealing with an injury right now. He's still questionable. I expect him to be able to shuck that aside, go out there and have a good week. Cordell Patterson is underprojected by the industry. Even though they're not favorites against the 49ers, Patterson can do it with his PPR production. So he's a little bit game script proof. He can go out there and get you that 7-8 catch game, or he can go out there and get you 25 carries for 150 yards. He's able to do it both ways, which makes him a very solid floor player for any of the type of projections that we're using. At number 1, Najee Harris, though, I want to go ahead and talk about him a little bit. Again, just like a Ben Roethlisberger, his props are through the roof. They expect a lot of things from the Steelers this week. Again, the line on this game is just 3 points. So Vegas has a lot more confidence in the Steelers than a lot of the DFS community does. So really like them there at 18.2 points. Again, the Texans, not one of the best defenses to play against either. So it works out for fantasy purposes. Sorry, not one of the better defenses in terms of rushing efficiency. Moving down to this Packers situation, if I'm going to take anybody from Green Bay, I'd rather go to A.J. Dillon than I would for an Aaron Jones. A.J. Dillon's got a decent matchup against this Ravens front seven. If there's any part of that part of the defense That is their strength. It would be their secondary. But now with Lattimore going down, it's not Lattimore. Humphrey, sorry, I couldn't think of his name. Humphrey over there for the Ravens. They also had Marcus Peters go down early on in the year. Earl Thomas is down for that defense. They're missing just pieces all over the place for the Ravens. That is becoming a shit show. So I love targeting that Ravens defense. At the beginning of the year, he would have been one of my best defenses to target. A quick question. Why do you like Jeff Wilson this week? Some of this. Yeah, dude. I think you're wrong there, right? He's going to get 20 touches. This is a good offensive line. I don't care that he's had a few down weeks. They've been playing from behind. That's just game script worthy, right? They have a much better matchup this week against the Falcons, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. It's a slam dunk play for me. So that's my thing there. I don't understand why you don't like him. I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but yeah, man, I really like him this week. I think he was 40% projected owned last week. He came in at 70% owned. And now, guys, if you see this down here, he's 14.5 projected owned. He's in the same situation. Actually, a better matchup against the Falcons. Should be a much better game script. Why the hell is he not 40% owned again? I mean, I get that he didn't have the best week, but that's going to happen from time to time. Even guys like a Najee Harris, a Joe Mixon are going to have bad games from time to time. It's because you're overreacting to the bad game. That's what I'll say there. That's why the industry is as low on him as he is. But much like a golfer for PGA Tour, that kind of thing, you don't want to overreact to one performance. It's 1 week. Anything could happen. He could have had a bad day. Play calling could have just favored other players. I mean, there's just so many ways a guy can fail. He's still in a great situation. I like going to him. Again, that's something that I want to talk about here too. He said, I'm sold, lol. I want to talk about this a little bit more, though, because it's important with DFS. Anytime you have chalk and they fail, people hate playing them next week, right? You feel like you got burned. I got burned by Jeff Wilson Jr. last week, but I'm willing to go back to him because the fact of the matter is there was a reason why he was chalk, right? And now that he's not chalk, he's in the same situation, but he's coming in at a fourth of the ownership. He should be a 4 times better play. I mean, it's just logic right there, right? And at the same time, people will time and time again fade that player. So that is regardless of the sport, whether you're playing golf DFS, NFL DFS, NBA DFS especially, because chalk usually lasts 3 or 4 nights there, especially with this whole COVID situation going on. It's that same type of circumstance, particularly with NBA, because if a player's out due to injury, normally they're out for a few days, and the pricing algorithm doesn't catch up after 1 day. Usually it takes them about a week. So in NBA DFS, that is particularly the case. A few mid-tier options I like Devontae Freeman. So I know you just mentioned Devontae Freeman as well. He's $5,500. If they're going to have any type of success against the Packers, it's probably because Freeman has a big day. So I don't expect that to be the case. I do expect Green Bay to win this game pretty handedly, particularly if Tyler Huntley is the starting quarterback. But if Lamar Jackson ends up being rolled in, Devontae Freeman becomes one of my favorite plays on the slate. So again, if anybody gets that news, that should be coming out any second now. Go ahead and put that down in the chat because I need to know about that ASAP. That's going to change not only Lamar's projection, that's going to change Freeman's. It's going to change all the wide receivers there. It's going to change the defense for the Packers. It's going to change Mark Andrews. It would make Mark Andrews one of the best plays on the slate. It's if he ends, I think he's going to end up getting rolled in. I could see that very well happening, even though everyone's been saying all week he's going to be out. That would just be a complete shit show. Michael Carter, way down the board at $4,700. He will be starting for the Jets this week. Again, they're underdogs. They've been underdogs for every game this year. At the same time, though, they come out and sometimes they really show out. This offensive line is one of the most underrated units in the NFL. So at 11.5% projected ownership, he's a pivot play that I really like for some value here. If we were going to go ahead and put a 1-to-1 with him and Jeff Wilson Jr., I'm probably taking Michael Carter. He's lower owned. Even though the projection's about 1 point off, you're talking about over a $300 difference, less ownership. That's more than enough made up for, in my opinion. So, and at the same time, Jeff Wilson Jr., better matchup against the Falcons. The Dolphins aren't a very good front seven either, right? So they're both positive matchups. I really like going to both, but if I had to choose one, it would be him. And at the bottom of the board, guys, I was going to try and talk about someone here, but I'm not going to force it here. We're going to get to wide receiver. I see there's a question down in the chat about wide receiver. If you're going to take a pure punt play, Craig Reynolds is worth a little bit of consideration. The matchup against the Cardinals isn't ideal, but last week he was the surprise play, right? When it went out there, got you a touchdown, was very involved as PPR wide receiver out of the backfield. He should get a lot of touches in this game, but he's not going to be the number one running back. So it's really hard to believe in the guy. It's really hard to put any confidence behind his play there, but an intriguing option will at the very least. I'm not sure if he's going to make my player pool. We'll have to see here in the next hour. I'm sure I'll go down and throw that in the Patreon chat if he does. Quick question. We got Lamb or Diggs this week. So if we look on the little spreadsheet we got here, right? So it depends what you can do with that extra $300. That extra $300 gets you up from an option you really like to somebody who's a meh kind of player, or if it takes you from somebody that you don't really like to a stud option, go ahead and take CD Lamb. But in terms of projection, you can see there's over a 3-point difference between the two. Stephon Diggs is the clear option there. He's higher owned, but as long as the rest of your lineup isn't super chalky, I think Stephon Diggs is your guy. Now, if you're playing the chalk, you're going to James Robinson, Tua Tagovailoa, which I'm pretty sure you are. Go to a CD Lamb, right? He's coming in lower owned. He has arguably the same type of ceiling. With that $300, you could probably spend up for a stud at least a better option at another position. So if you're doing a one-on-one there, that's what I would say. And I'm assuming this is a lineup. I guess we can go through it real quick. We have plenty of time here. He says Allen, and I'm assuming Wilson, Jeff Wilson Jr., Carter. So two value options at running back. Okay, let's see what you got with the rest of your lineup. Lamb, Chase. I love both of those picks at wide receiver. You guys can see my options there. Both are in my player pool. Andrews, Gabriel Davis, Cowboys. So first off, really like the construction. I like that you aren't super chalky. I mean, you're using Gabriel Davis, who is going to be a chalk option at wide receiver. But the rest of your lineup is all middle tier owned guys. That's really what you're looking for. If I had to guess, you have less than 80% combined ownership between all of those players, which is what you're looking for, at least for NFL DFS. So I like that lineup a whole lot. I don't think you need to use two value running backs on the slate. I think you could probably use a Wilson or a Carter. You might have to spend down from one of the Lamb or the Chase picks, but maybe tinker around and see what that looks like as well. I do like the lineup, though. I don't think you have to change anything. I just think those two value running backs could be a little bit hairy. Usually I try to limit that to one per lineup, but I don't think that's something you absolutely have to avoid. So just go ahead and tinker around and see what you can do with that. Let's talk about some of these wide receivers, though. Deontay Johnson against the Tennessee Titans defense. Absolutely love this situation. He's been an absolute usage monster these last 7 or 8 weeks, particularly with Juju Smith-Schuster out of the lineup. And if you take a look at his floor, he's scored over 16 fantasy points pretty much every single game this year. The last time I checked it, I'm pretty sure it is every single game this year. He scored over, I believe he scored 13.5 fantasy points once, and then every other week has scored over 16 fantasy points. So one of the more consistent players in the NFL, but also gives you that top end level upside. Devontae Adams, if you have the money to pay up for him, go ahead and do so. He's substantially more expensive than any other player in the field, though. So is a little bit prohibitive in that fashion. Jamar Chase, CD Lamb, we just talked about him. 2 of my favorite plays on the slate. Really like the price point here. Also like the matchups. Jamar Chase, even though he is facing Surtain, we talked about that Broncos defense. He has more speed than Surtain. So that's going to be such a fun matchup to watch. I'm going to have the red zone up, and then I'm probably going to have this Bengals-Broncos game up when it's on, because I think this Jamar Chase Surtain matchup is going to be electric. You have arguably what I think are going to be 2 of the best players at their positions in the next 3 or 4 years going up against each other as rookies in a really important game as well. I mean, this is essentially a playoff game between the Bengals and the Broncos. That is going to be one fun matchup to watch. Amari Cooper, I love going to him. Dak Prescott is being a little bit slept on this week, in my opinion. I have this weird feeling, and again, I have no way to prove this, with all these massive tournaments going on this week for like the 2.5 mil, the first, everything like that. I think some of the industry, some of the content providers out there are kind of shielding their picks, like what they're going to be using for that contest. They don't want to like boost projections of like a Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, that kind of thing, because there's just guys that are blatantly misprojected across the industry. I do my own projections, obviously, but I look around the industry to kind of see what everyone else is doing, where I can leverage some of that ownership. It's kind of how I calculate some of my ownership as well. Get an idea of like who's being over projected by some of the bigger sites. And there's some interesting guys being completely overlooked, like especially this Dallas team. Where it's like they're projecting for like 2.4x, 2.2x across the industry, that kind of thing. Whereas most weeks they're projecting like 2.7, 2.8x, which would put them into your lineups in an optimizer. I just think that's a little bit interesting. I'll be all over that Cowboys stack this week. Definitely being under-owned there. My cat is trying to escape my room right now, so sorry if you guys hear that. Oh, she opened the door. There you go. Yeah, my cat can open doors, by the way. It's interesting. She's a smart character. Jerry Jeudy down here at $5,400. If you're running back that Bengals game, again, I expect this to be a relatively high scoring game. You're dealing with two offenses that absolutely have to win here. I think he's a good buyback option. Julio Jones, we do have Joe Hayden back for the Steelers, so it makes him a little bit less of a good play, but he's coming in with minimal ownership there at 3.9%. If Joe Hayden was out for the Steelers, he would be an absolute smash play, but I assume his ownership would also have been there as well. Chris Kirk at 13.6% ownership. He's going to be the de facto number one wide receiver for this team with Hopkins out of the lineup. Really like him there at $5,300. He's one of the safer value options on this slate. We know he's going to go out there, get you 8 targets, that kind of thing. If he ends up scoring a touchdown, could very well end up cracking that optimal lineup. Jamison Crowder, I like him as an option with Zach Wilson. We talked about how Zach Wilson was an intriguing option a little bit earlier. Sterling Shepard, great option returning for this Giants team. I really like the matchup here as well. I mean, Dallas has one of the weaker secondaries in the NFL. Great front seven, great. Trayvon Diggs, I'll say, is like the one exception to that role. He's a great player in that secondary, but aside from him, they're all nobodies. They also kind of suck. Cortland Sutton, also a good buyback option for any Cincinnati Bengals stacks. Rondale Moore, very high upside player for that Cardinals offense. We already know that they're going to go out and win this game, especially with Hopkins out of the lineup, potentially James Conner missing as well. He could be a very intriguing option. I'm going to go ahead and check on this Lamar Jackson news, by the way, guys, because it is very important for this slate. And I'm assuming that it's out by now. So let me go ahead and check this. So we have James Conner active. We got that news. We have Zach Ertz active as well. Kind of bummed about both of those news right there because I kind of was hoping James Conner would be out because we could use Chase Edmonds as a very good value play. Zach Ertz doesn't really change all that much. Let's see. Do we have any news on Lamar Jackson? Oh, that's a 4:00 game, so we're not even going to hear about that, are we? They had it listed on the 1:00 section earlier, guys. Sorry about that. I should have double-checked that. We're not going to get that news until probably 3:00. So I was wishful thinking, hoping we'd get that sometime soon. I'm going to proceed with what I'm expecting right now is that he'll be out. We have Taylor Huntley in, but I do have just a weird feeling that he could potentially end up getting rolled in, which would be really annoying. Let's go over to Devontae Parker, though. So Devontae Parker was chalk the other week. I guess people don't learn from their own mistakes. He went out there, had a very subpar game. He's now more expensive against a better secondary at 33% ownership. So same story, somebody like a Myles Gaskin, same story as somebody like a James Robinson. Going to be a relatively straightforward fade for me this week. Gabriel Davis coming in higher owned than I'd like, but is projecting off very well. Most likely going to be in my player pool. That is going to be chalk I'll be willing to eat there. A few other value options I want to talk about. Albert Wilson, great pivot off somebody like a Devontae Parker. Same thing, Mac Hollins down here. Mac Hollins had a big touchdown last week. He's had a few touchdowns throughout the year. Very large wide receiver. Somebody who's also a deep play threat, extremely fast. The issue is he's not a very good route runner, right? So you kind of got to get wide open for him to be a good play there. But we've seen him have that touchdown upside in the past. And to be honest with you, in terms of skill level, Devontae Parker, not a whole lot better than these other two wide receivers. Albert Wilson, smaller bodied player, but very good route runner. Mac Hollins, very similar type build to a Devontae Parker, arguably better hands as well. Much better price at $3,100. He's coming in at 0.4% ownership, right? Compared to 33%. So you really got to ask yourself, is Devontae Parker 100 times more likely to go out there and succeed than somebody like a Mac Hollins? The clear answer is no. So that's why it becomes a very good pivot play right there. That's how I do a lot of my analysis. Let's talk about this mid-tier range because there's a few guys here that are interesting that we kind of skipped over. We talked about a good amount of them, but I'm going to reiterate a few of them here. Cortland Sutton coming in with 1% ownership. That just doesn't seem right. I mean, he is the number 2 wide receiver for this team, but early on in the year was absolutely killing it, putting up 18 to 20 fantasy points per game. I think that's a very intriguing option in that mid-tier range. And we kind of already talked about going to somebody like a Christian Kirk. AJ Green, very similar situation. Without DeAndre Hopkins in the lineup, it's going to get a lot more snaps. And particularly AJ Green, he's going to get a lot more red zone looks with Hawkins out of the lineup. So he botched that one red zone look towards the end of the game. If you guys remember that primetime game early on in the year, hopefully he makes up for that here today with a few touchdowns. Let's go on to tight end. Tight end is a kind of a shit show today. We have a lot of injuries, a lot of people out with COVID, not many top end options to speak of either. But we'll make do, right? As we always do at this position. It's never really sexy for fantasy purposes, anyways. All right, here we go. So got our tight end projections on the board, and really the only spend up option I love here is George Kittle. Right, $7,500, good matchup against the Falcons. Definitely coming in with high ownership there at 16.4%. I think you could do a whole lot worse in terms of ownership. Earlier on the week, he was right around 26% projected owned. Has come back down to earth a little bit here. So I think he's in play once again. At 25%, you would have been talking about a full-on fade, but he's at least doable at that type of exposure. Kyle Pitts, interesting option as a buyback for some of those 49er stacks. I'm not going to be using any 49er stacks this week. I'm a little bit more intrigued by the Matt Ryan play, which we've discussed a little bit earlier on. 3.5% owned, definitely being a little bit overlooked there. Zach Ertz is playing. I expect the ownership to come in a little bit more than 8% now because we got that news early, probably closer to 11, 12% ownership, but a great matchup. I absolutely love Kyler Murray this week. I'm going to have 40, maybe even 50% of my lineups as Kyler Murray stacks, which makes Zach Ertz a prime factor in my lineups. Mike Gesicki, 17.5% owned. I'm not going to say this whole same story, the whole, charades thing about the Miami Dolphins time and time again. They're completely overrated today. Dalton Schultz at $4,900, great stacking option. You can pair him up with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, that kind of thing. Very balanced build right there. Pat Freiermuth, I think he's great as a one-off option, also for any of your Steelers stacks. Like both of those guys there. James O'Shaughnessy. So if you're going to go to anybody on this Jacksonville team, O'Shaughnessy last week was 20% owned. He was chalk at the same type of price tag in a worse matchup. Now, everyone's all over this team because Urban Meyer's out of the mix. He's at the same price, better matchup against the Houston Texans, and he's 5% owned. DFS sometimes is just especially when you take a step back and just look at it week to week, it could be a very confusing thing, right? Seemingly he should be like 30, 40% owned this week for that type of logic. Sure, he had a bad week last week, so that's really why this is happening. People are afraid to go back to him because he had a bad week. But if people were all over him last week, if everyone's median projections on him are like 12, 13 points, but why aren't we on him again? So I'm going to be on James O'Shaughnessy this week. He's a great buyback spot after a tough week. Evan Ingram, I don't know why he's getting as much ownership as he is. He's been atrocious this year, and he has Mike Glennon throwing him the ball. So enough said right there. If we're going to go to anybody down low, Josiah DeGuara has a great quarterback throwing the ball in Aaron Rodgers. He's an extremely athletic option. And as the weeks have gone on, he's really emerged as that number one tight end for this Packers team. He's starting to get more and more snaps. He's getting a lot more targets than somebody like a Mercedes Lewis. And it's showing that he's a more than capable enough blocker as well. So he's only $2,700. It's probably my favorite value play here on the slate at tight end. Durham Smythe for the Dolphins team. Again, he's only 2.5% owned, and he's playing a ton of snaps for the Dolphins. Particularly, I forget his name. There's another tight end there for the Dolphins. I should know this. It's one of those things where it's like on the tip of my tongue. But he's out for the I'm trying to think. It's Adam Shaheen. So Adam Shaheen is out for the Dolphins. He typically plays about 30, 40% of snaps for them. They love using two tight end sets there in Miami. But now that he's out of the mix, Smythe has seen over 70% of snaps the last 2 weeks. So at $2,500, I think he's an intriguing option there. He's definitely a receiving threat as well. He's not only just a good blocker. Could go out, get you a touchdown. And for him to be 2.5% owned versus Gesicki at 17.5 at half the price and less than 6, 7 times less ownership, just ridiculous in my opinion, right? You're dealing with touchdown dependent players at tight end to begin with, let alone guys that are dealing with the same type of snap share, same type of workload in the red zone. So really like going to Smythe over somebody like Mike Gesicki. Again, that whole Dolphins offense in general is just a little bit overrated. And let's finish up with our defenses. And go ahead and put any questions you guys have down in the chat now. So when I finish up the defenses, we can go through them. It can be lineups. It can be individual players. If you guys are coming in late and you guys want me to talk about my top stacks again, that kind of thing, I can go ahead and do that. Just go ahead and let me know down in the chat, and we'll wrap up with your questions. Here at defense, though, really, and I want to touch on just defenses in general before we hop into it. Defenses are a crapshoot at DFS. I mean, you're dealing with median projections here between 5 and 9.5 points, that kind of thing. And in reality, the optimal lineup tonight is going to have a defense that scores 20 fantasy points. They're going to score touchdown defense, have 2-3 turnovers, that kind of thing. And it's unprojectable. There's no way to expect that type of performance. It's going to happen from one of these teams week in and week out. So anytime you're running defenses, you're trying to determine who to play. First off, you should be considering ownership, number one, not their projection. And number two, you should be considering their price. Both of those are more important than their projection themselves. That's why I have a lot more exposure to some of these teams down low. And sure, there's some guys that I'm completely excluding from my pool, right? Like a Giants team that's going to get torched by the Cowboys offense. A Jets team that doesn't project, they're in my player pool. Falcons team that's going to get torched by the 49ers, right? There's a reason why they're excluded from that pool. Whereas a Jets team down here, where this is a low over-under type game, they're not as likely to go out and get torched. That's the guys that I'm willing to take chances on down low. The Jets, in fact, even though they're only 1.2 projected owned, I have 25% of them, right? So I'm willing to take stands on some of these guys down low. Lions, same type of story. Even though I really like the Cardinals this week, in lineups where I don't have any Cardinals, I'm willing to take a chance on this defense. They're a defense that in the past has put up a lot of touchdown production. Just 2 years ago, they were the number one defense in all of fantasy football. And even though they're dealing with a new coach, new defensive scheme, players have just bled over the place. Guys retired, guys were sent off in free agency, that kind of thing. It's more than conceivable that they go out, get a defensive touchdown, have a good game. It's going to happen to one of these teams seemingly at random every single week. The Steelers last year scored a defensive touchdown like every other week. They've had 0 this year. So it's teams like that I'm willing to take chances on that are coming in at low ownership. They're at attractive price points. That's really how I'm handling this. So I'm not going to go through all of the options here. A few guys that I'm intrigued in that I have a lot of ownership with. We already talked about the Jets down here. Steelers, same kind of thing. Now, granted, I'm a Steeler fan, right? But again, they've shown that touchdown upside in the past. They have playmakers on defense that are capable of scoring touchdowns, most notably Minkah Fitzpatrick. The guy could play wide receiver in the NFL. He's that good in terms of his ball skills. When you have players like that on a defensive team, you're more likely to go out and score touchdowns. Another prime example of this, Kevin Byard for the Tennessee Titans. So on the other side of things, right? They're also in my player pool. Why? Because Byard is an absolute stud. When he gets the ball in his hands, he's scoring like half the time. So those are the type of defenses that I'm willing to take chances on. So, you're going to hear there's going to be defense gurus out there that claim they know the defense that's going to go out there and score 20 points every week. They're full of shit. So that's all I'll say about that. Picking defenses is like picking a name out of a hat. The numbers say that's what they portray. It's an extremely high volatile sport. You probably have a better chance at picking a golf winner week in and week out at random than you would at trying to pick one of these defenses. Cowboys up here, they're also a team I'm willing to take a chance on. Mike Glennon is an absolute shit show at quarterback. We know he's going to have some turnovers here. Maybe the Cowboys take one back for a touchdown. Dolphins defense, right? So Zach Wilson, no doubt that he's going to go out there, probably throw a really annoying pick, have some type of random fumble or something like that. That's taken back for a touchdown. That's an intriguing option. And of course, anytime you have Jared Goff quarterbacking a team, same type of story, right? So there are some of the guys up top that I'm willing to take chances on. We already talked about some of those, that Steelers-Titans game, which could be a really intriguing option, and the Dolphins down low. Got a question here. Then we're going to hop into our favorite stacks. Let's go over the question first. Miguel says, who would you pivot off Robinson at a similar price? So I'll go ahead and bring it up for you. There's a few guys I'm considering for that position. And to me, there's guys that are projected higher that are coming in at a third of the ownership, which makes it pretty simple in my opinion. So let's go up here. 34% ownership on a James Robinson, right? So some of these guys down here have as blanks. I'm not thrilled about switching to, particularly Chase Edmonds. Not thrilled about using because James Conner's out of the lineup. The prime pivot would be a Jeff Wilson Jr., right? You're looking at $400 difference. So you'd be able to spend up at another position, probably at wide receiver. It'd be the easiest way to go out and do that. Jeff Wilson Jr., talking about a projection difference of 2 points. We already talked about how that's negligible when you're talking about a GPP. I mean, 16 fantasy points isn't enough anyways to be in an optimal lineup. Neither is 14 points, but their ceiling is right about the same. You're talking about, and I don't have the numbers up in front of me right now. I would assume that James Robinson's ceiling at right around a 30% usage rate is 28 fantasy points, somewhere in that range. Jeff Wilson Jr., right around 26, 27 points, right? Very similar numbers there. I'd much rather go to the Jeff Wilson Jr. at a third of the ownership. Michael Carter Jr. is another pivot. He's significantly less expensive, though, so it's $700 less. Very similar projection rate, 13.4. In terms of points per dollar, very similar in terms of James Robinson as well. Just coming in at a fraction of the ownership in a very similar type matchup. So that's where I'm going to have a majority of my ownership. I'll have a few shares of Dontrell Hilliard. I'll still have a few of Chase Edmonds. I mean, he's shown in the past that even as a backup to James Conner is more than capable of putting up production. Deontay Foreman against a very weak Pittsburgh defense. That's an intriguing option. And I'll probably even have a few shares of Chuba Hubbard. I'm 150 maxing. I'm not doing single entry or double, 2-3 max or anything like that. I'm going to have a pretty big net because most people in the field are going to have 70, maybe even 100% James Robinson, right? If the guy's projected for 30, 40% ownership, you're going to have to lock him to get any type of significant leverage, which means I can take 70, 80% ownership and spread it over these 6, 7 players, right? To me, that's a lot more efficient than trying to huddle that ownership on one player, especially when the projection differences, are minimal. Sure, he has the highest projection of anyone in that range, but it isn't by some crazy margin. So hopefully that answers your question there. Cool. Thank you. You're welcome. Of course. Any questions, go ahead and throw them down there. Let's move on to quarterbacks, the stacks again. This is probably the most important part of the channel on the channel of the show, just because we're going to talk about some of the stacks and some of the pairing options, because there's definitely going to be some chalky stacks today. And to be honest with you, rather than taking like the number 1 wide receiver, number 2 wide receiver, stacking them up with a quarterback, I'm going to be focusing on a lot of 1-3s, 2-3s, that kind of thing, which we'll talk about right now. First and foremost, favorite stack of the week is Kyler Murray. We talked about that at the beginning of the show. Really like using Christian Kirk. That's pretty much a slam dunk pick there. The unfortunate part, he's the chalky pick for this team. So I think using guys like a Rondale Moore and AJ Green, definitely an intriguing option there, particularly at low ownership, especially if you're going up to the expensive quarterback. Christian Kirk, the most expensive guy of the bunch there. If you go to an AJ Green and a Rondale Moore, you're going to have an extra 1,000 or 2 to spend. So that is an intriguing way to pair up that Cardinals team. Dak Prescott, you've already talked about how I think the industry isn't really giving him his due diligence. It seems like a few guys that are playing in the Millionaire Maker this week don't want to give up their pick of Dak Prescott, because there is every metric in the book points to him having a massive game here. Should probably be the highest owned quarterback on the slate. I'm going to have right around 35, 40% Kyler Murray. Same thing with Dak Prescott. It's going to be a majority of my ownership and exposure for this week. Really like using somebody like a CeeDee Lamb. Obviously has a really high upside there, but he's going to be the chalk stacking option, right? So I'm going to be mixing a lot of people like an Amari Cooper, Dalton Schultz, potentially even a Michael Gallup, who's still going to play 40, maybe even 50% of snaps. So that's the way I'll be going there. Still will have some CeeDee Lamb stacks, but I think it's really important to try and mix in some of those other options. Joe Burrow, he's not going to be one of my higher owned stacks. Probably going to go ahead and match to the field there. But because they are favorites in my book against that Broncos team, going to be intriguing in terms of points per dollar. Ben Roethlisberger, also a low-owned stack I'm probably going to get right around 8% ownership. That's what I had in my build right before we got on stream here. Again, high over-under game. This Texans defense is one of the worst units in the NFL, and a lot of the Vegas props are very favorable towards Ben Roethlisberger. So that is an intriguing spot. I'll definitely be getting there. A lot of that has to do with the fact I'm a Steeler fan too. I will go ahead and put that out there. Cam Newton there at $5,400. Again, it's a terrible matchup, but we've seen some of these guys in the past have terrible matchups, go out there and still thrive. Cam Newton, in terms of fantasy production, is one of the best players in the NFL. I mean, he's going to put up passing yardage, rushing usage. In the red zone, he is their rushing usage. I mean, he's going to get 80, 90% of the usage in the red zone on setup run plays, power plays to the outside QB powers. That's their offense in the red zone. So really like Cam Newton there. In terms of stacking, though, he's the only guy in this slate I'm willing to do this with. I'm not worried about stacking him, right? He's somebody who can get you that rushing upside. You don't really need to force in a DJ Moore, Chuba Hubbard. Tommy Tremble. I mean, they don't have very many good options on that offense to begin with. Brandon Zylstra, that kind of thing. I'd rather use him as a one-off. So if I'm going to go to anybody on the slate on their own, is going to be Cam Newton. A few other guys that they're in my player pool as of right now, but I'm not sure if they're going to last. I have a few shares of Josh Allen. Now, he's extremely chalky on this slate. The Carolina Panthers defense is definitely underrated. I mean, they have Stephon Gilmore out there, a lot of really good cornerbacks. That could be a little bit of a trap spot. So I might end up taking him out, trying to fit in a different quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is somebody I would pivot to, where he's only 5.4% owned. So if I were to take my 8 or 9% of Josh Allen, maybe take a few more percent from Murray and Prescott, given to Rodgers, I could easily get leverage there as well. So that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. You already talked about how, I mean, he's just a savant at quarterback. I mean, this guy is going to be a good quarterback for the next 5-6 years. He's Tom Brady written all over him in terms of longevity, not in terms of greatness. I don't think he's going to get anywhere near the same amount of Super Bowls. But Aaron Rodgers could play another 10 years in the NFL if he wanted to. He protects himself very well. He doesn't take hits. And the way that he throws the ball, especially with kind of like his sidearm natural style, that lasts a lot longer than, overextending your shoulder over the top. Pitchers have that problem too. That's why a lot of guys that they don't throw completely sidearm, they kind of throw 3/4, will pitch until they're like 45. Particularly if they're not, high speed throwers. But Aaron Rodgers has a cannon for an arm, so that doesn't help him. But longevity aside, great play here. I really like where he's going with that offense. Stacking options, Devontae Adams, you go to Alan Lazard. Marcus Valdes-Scantling, I believe, is out with COVID. I'd have to double check on that. I didn't have him projected at wide receiver, so that's why I'm assuming my system had him out. Just so many guys out with COVID, right? There's like 50, so I'm losing track at this point. A couple guys I'm fading, right? So in case any of you guys got in here late, Tua Tagovailoa is the fade of the week. This whole entire Miami offense, it doesn't really make sense that they're owned in the way that they are. This Jets defense, particularly against the pass, is actually a top 10 unit in the NFL. And even though they let up a ton of points, a ton of rushing usage, that's not going to benefit Tua. He's not a rushing quarterback. So that's my 2 cents on him. And that's all we got here, guys. I'm going to go out and finish my lineups here. If anybody's watching this on replay, feel free to go ahead and put any of your questions down in the chat. I'm going to leave my phone next to me. If I get any type of notification, I'll make sure to get back to you guys. But we're going to have even more content coming this week because of the COVID madness. We obviously weren't able to have our normal video content this week. I shot 3 different times. Every time I was right about to upload, either a game got canceled, a bunch of players got rolled out due to COVID, that kind of thing. And by the 3rd time, I threw my hands up. But we are going to have a stream for the game tonight. So we're going to have Sunday Night Football. I'm expecting to go live right around 4:30 p.m. The replay will be up on the channel. So if you guys missed that, obviously we'll be able to watch that after the 4 o'clock games and that kind of thing. So that'll be up for tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to have a Monday Night Football slate preview as well. Tomorrow's my birthday, so I'm going to wake up early, do a live stream. It might even be at like 8 a.m., that kind of thing, and then log off for the day. So I'll make sure to get that preview up for you guys. But tomorrow is going to be a very light day for me. And Tuesday, we have 2 more games, right? So I'm going to wake up Tuesday. We're going to do another live stream for that. Reason why I want to do them in terms of live streams and not pre-made content is I can make content and an hour later it become completely obsolete, right? We could have 4 or 5 players marked out. We could have games postponed, canceled, forfeited, whatever the case is. So we're going to wait until the day of, morning of. I'm going to make sure you guys have time to watch the content just to make sure that it doesn't expire. So hopefully that works for you guys. It'll all be up there. Don't be worried. And good luck with all